Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to What is God's Heart After? Preposition, Function, and Meaning in 1 Samuel 13:14 with Dr. Chip Hardy. We're excited to get started, so let's go ahead and begin. My name is Dougal DeClarn, and I am a PhD student, as well as the Research and Outreach Coordinator at the library here at Southeastern. First, I want to give a special thanks to our sponsor, B&H Publishing, who has donated a word search Bible package for each participant in the Southeastern Symposium. I would also like to take a moment and promote the PhD in Old Testament degree, which is actually what I am getting a PhD in. This PhD is designed for pastors and teachers who intend to teach biblical studies in liberal arts colleges, universities, churches, and majority world academic or ecclesial contexts. It offers specialized expertise on the vocabulary, grammar, syntax, exegesis, and theology of the Old Testament, as well as its application within the contemporary context. We're going to drop a link into the chat so that you can find out more information about that if you're interested. If this is your first time, and it probably is since this is your first breakout session, please be aware of both the chat box and the Q&A box that is down at the bottom of your screen. The chat box is where panelists such as Dr. Hardy and myself and someone else directly connected with this event will send information out to the entire group, like the link I mentioned before. And that's where you'll find more information for the PhD in Old Testament. The Q&A box is where you'll be able to ask questions of the speaker. And here's how the Q&A will work. You may type questions into the Q&A or give reactions at any point in the presentation. If your name is not clearly stated on your Zoom account, please type your first name and last name in the Q&A box. This will help us avoid any confusion if your name is not unusual, like Dougal or Humphrey. And also, if you could include where you are from, that would help us out in giving us context about where you're from. If the host presenter chooses to answer the question, they will give a typed response. Raise your hand in the Q&A box. Please do not raise your hand unless you have been instructed to do so. This helps us to be quick in finding you to unmute your microphone. When it's time for you to ask your questions, the host will call on you, or if we have several questions that are the same, I might just mention that, give a summary of the questions. But otherwise, if we do open it up to you, you'll receive a request to unmute your microphone. And this request will appear on your screen, and you have to give us the okay before I will actually be able to hear you. Then you can ask your question. Once you've finished, we will mute you again, and Dr. Hardy will answer your question. So after all that information, now I would like to present Dr. Chip Hardy, who is the Associate Professor of Old Testament and Semitic Languages here at Southeastern.
Hi, welcome from Southeastern's beautiful campus. I'm joining you from my office, and I'd like to talk with you for a few moments about a very famous verse from 1 Samuel 13:14. So welcome, and let's listen to this. So David is possibly the single most important human character in the Old Testament. His name appears more times than Moses and Abraham combined. Over half of these occurrences are in the narratives of Samuel Kings. There, David and his kingdom are the focal point of Israel's history. Nearly 40% of the chapters in the books of Samuel and Kings are devoted to tracking his exploits and those of the kingdom he established. Other notable kings such as Jehoash, Uzziah, and Manasseh, who reigned a similar number of years, are limited only about 20 verses each. In the Deuteronomist history, David is the divinely selected king. Yahweh chose him to lead Israel. He is contrasted with Saul, whom the people chose. Saul is foolish and does not act according to Yahweh's commands. His kingdom is disestablished and promised to another. David is described as the Ish Kilvavo, that is the man after his own heart, in 1 Samuel 13:14, 1 Kings 8:16, and even Acts 13:22. Does this imply that David is better or more moral than Saul? By what measure is this determined? From a contemporary ethical perspective, both characters are seriously flawed and even do reprehensible things. Neither are paragons of godly leadership. I haven't seen the book Lead Like David yet. Rather, they use their power often for their own pleasure to the harm of those under their authority. So what is the difference here? The pivotal phrase comes from 1 Samuel 13:14. Ish kil vavo. There is near uniformity in the English translations about how this is rendered. David is said to be a man after Yahweh's own heart. The popular understanding of this phrase appears to give divine authorization to David's actions. But even the English idiom is less clear than it might appear. The word heart, of course, is used in the archaic sense, including intentions and desires. That is to say, a combination of what most modern Western people refer to as their head, the thinker, and their heart, the feeler. The English preposition after also provides a range of possibilities. Primarily, it indicates order. This includes temporal ordering, spatial ordering, and priority ordering. So temporal ordering would be something like the winning point came after time expired. Time. Spatial ordering, the wind followed after the storm in space. Or priority ordering, you might say job comes after family. In priority, it's second. In addition, the functions of pursuit and agreement or illusion are also feasible. So pursuit would be something like she yearned after her lover, in pursuit of her lover. Agreement or illusion would be he takes after his mother. But so what is the best understanding of the English phrase? The idea of order is, of course, doubtful in this situation. So we must resort to these last two ideas, pursuit or agreement. So does this phrase in English mean the man in pursuit of God's promises? Or could it mean the man agreeing with God's purposes or purposes? The former says more about God's disposition, while the latter focuses on the character of the human agent. The English phrase is ambiguous at the end of the day in its focus. Until quite recently, the dominant interpretation emphasized the condition of David's heart, agreement, illusion. But P. Kyle McCarter suggests another option. He says the phrase, a man after God's own heart, has nothing to do with the great fondness of Yahweh for David, or any special quality of David, to whom it patently refers. Rather, it emphasizes the free divine selection of the heir to the throne as the alternative to the endurance of Saul's kingship or dynasty over Israel forever. He consequently understands this phrase as Yahweh will seek out a man of his own choosing, McCarter's view is followed in almost all recent scholarship since he first proposed this in the early 1980s. Let's examine this issue by looking at the function of prepositions in Hebrew, and then draw some conclusions about this particular issue. The preposition, of course, is a word that stands prepositioned before nominals, and they create a phrase. Prepositions vary morphologically, including this category a large number of monosyllabic and bisyllabic forms. So depending on whether the lexeme takes independent action or not, they can be distinguished in Hebrew as separable or inseparable. Inseparable prepositions, there's three of those, which are monosyllabic, ba, la, and ka, which is the one we see here, and a few others can be used similarly. Prepositions do not refer to entities, characteristics, or actions. Rather, they express grammatical relationships. In this, they may be included in the class of what we call function words, or you might have learned them as particles. These include auxiliaries and conjunctions, determiners, expletives, interjections, pronouns, qualifiers, and even some adverbs. These grammatical morphemes make up a small percentage of the total number of lexemes, so there are few types, but they are high-frequency words. There are many tokens. Prepositions are found in nearly every verse of the Bible, and they signal semantic relationships between concepts. The functions may be described as indicating relationships between two different objects. One object, which can be called the trajector. So in this example, the man was running through the forest. The man is the trajector, and the other object is called the landmark, i.e. the forest here. The landmark is traditionally called the prepositional complement or prepositional object. So in this sentence, the man was running through the forest. The man is trajector, the forest is a landmark, and through, the preposition, is described as the path function. Other examples of these semantic relationships include notions of place, time, goal, or even interest. Prepositions, though, are notoriously polyvalent. They express a range of distinct relationships, but their usage in any single context is particular. It cannot refer to all the options at once. The best way to know the options is to consult a grammar or a dictionary. One should not simply learn glosses, that is single word replacements, when considering prepositions. Rather, the appropriate sense should be determined by comparing the possible relationships of place, time, goal, source, and interest. It should also be noted that these relationships should be taken as guidelines and not impermeable categories. Many functions are related or even overlapping. For example, he ran after her may designate a temporal or spatial ordering, but these functions cannot be easily separated, as the semantics of run include chronological as well as locational realities. However, the senses that we've seen before of pursuit and illusion are quite different. We can say pursuit, he ran after her in the pursuit of her, with a knife, say. That's one thing. It's quite a bit different than the illusion. He ran after her, meaning he ran like her running. These are completely different meanings of the phrase after her. Whereas time and space are often linked, only one of these options can be intended in the context the preposition is used. Regarding the preposition ka, Williams' Hebrew grammar designates the function generally as likeness, as in the similarity or identity. And more specifically, he illustrates 7 possible functions for this preposition ka. And here they are for you, 7 possible ones. All right, let's look at these very quickly together. All right, the first one is the option of comparison. Comparison, English as, like, and such as do similar things. The preposition phrase can form the predicate of a verbless clause. The sense with this usage is either likeness or comparison. So we have the phrase, Uki kamoka b'Yisrael. Who is like you in Israel? This is a comparison. Who is like you? One compared to another. The second idea is the one of approximation in Williams' group. So an example of this could be Ruth 1:4. They lived there in Moab about ka'eset sinin, about 10 years. So approximate. The third option was the concessive. We can look at Genesis 39:10 for this. And we see here that although she spoke to Joseph daily, he did not obey her to sleep with her, although the concessive ka davara, he didn't, even though she spoke with him. The accordant value, notice this one, because this one will come important in our verse in a minute when we come back to it. We see, I have done, in 1 Kings 3:12, hine asiti kedavareka, I have done according to your word, corresponding with, consistent with. The according to function is used to describe how the verb is done here. Notice, how is he done? According to his word. The causal has a special function, which is an example here, ka'asher, just because you've not listened to Yahweh's voice, therefore Yahweh has done this to you today. The sixth example of Williams would be an asseverative. This is English indeed or truly. So we see ki hu ka'ish emet, truly, because truly he is, or indeed he is a faithful man. Lastly, we have the temporal use. I didn't give you an example here, but this is a specialized use we see with the verb haya. In Hebrew, most prepositional phrases function as adverbial modifiers, but they may, in some cases, describe nouns. As adverbs, they are typically placed at the end of clauses. So we have the order subject, verb, object, modifier. The adverbial usage describes how the action is done. As a nominal modifier, on the other hand, the preposition immediately follows and describes the noun. It characteristically requires a relative between the noun and the prepositional phrase. For example, in 1 Samuel 9:8, we see a phrase, who is your servant that you would take favorable notice of a dead dog? Hakelav Hamet, Asher Kamoni. Who is like me? This is describing the one who is like the dead dog. However, the relative in some small cases can be omitted, particularly with indefinite trajectories. One possible case is with 1 Kings 13:18. This example indicates a similarity between the old deceptive prophet, if you remember the story, and the addressee, the other prophet. And he says, Gam ani navi kamo ka. I also am a prophet similar to you. That's the nominal use. But it could also be the adverbial use. I am like you, also a prophet. That ambiguity comes up in the story, of course, as well. The nuance between the adnominal and the adverbial modifier is nearly undetectable in many of these examples. So this brings us back around to 1 Samuel 13:14. Returning to this verse, let us examine the three major interpretive issues. One, the function as adverbial or adnominal modifier. Second, the function, or excuse me, the semantics of the preposition. And third, the referent of the pronominal suffix. All right, so those are the three major issues we'll try to handle here in the next few moments. All right. If you remember Williams, he puts functions or semantics as 1 and 4 in his list, which was comparison and accordative. Right? They're the most likely options for our example, kilvavo here, according to or like his heart. The prepositional phrase may be adverbial, describing bikesh, he sought like his heart, or it can be adnominative, meaning a man like his heart, who is like his heart. The pronominal referent, of course, is either the man himself, who is his heart. It's either the man's heart, or it is Yahweh's heart. All right? So in this, we come up with 14 different options for how to interpret this verse. You ready for this? Notice that the blue options are the comparative, like, and the orange options are the accordative. Now you can memorize all those really quickly. We'll go through them in just a minute. 14 options. The preposition is used adverbially elsewhere within the modifying similar actions. All right, so let's look at the examples of this. So the adverbial usage, starting in this way with Yahweh has sought for himself a man like his heart or according to his heart. All right, what does the adnominal look like? Or excuse me, the adverbial look like here? Well, let's give you an example from Proverbs 2:4. We see, if you seek wisdom as you seek money. So this is the comparative use, and it's comparing the way in which you seek. The example from Proverbs 2:4 contains the identical verb preposition combination, bikesh ka, to seek something like, as found in 1 Samuel 13:14. Here, it has comparative semantics, of course. In 1 Chronicles 15:13, we see another one, which is very similar. For we did not seek him according to his judgment, ka mishpat. So 1 Chronicles 15:13 evidences a comparative verbal notion with darash plus ka, to seek according to. But it is best understood as indicating the accordative meaning. Both of these options suggest that the adverbial function may be used with either the comparative or the coordinative or the accordative meanings. If we carry these two adverbial usages to our example in 1 Samuel 13:14, we get numbers 2a and 2b. So this is making explicit the adverbial function. So with the adverb of comparison, these options would describe the way in which Yahweh seeks a man, like or as Yahweh seeks his heart. The referent, though, his heart, of the pronominal suffix is either Yahweh, as we see in 3a, or it's the man, as we see in 3b. So the pronoun is either identical to the subject, as in 3a, or to the man, as in 3b. So what we get is Yahweh sought a man for himself as either Yahweh seeks his own heart or as Yahweh seeks the man's heart. One difficulty arises with 3a in that there are no other positive examples of a human or deity seeking after his own heart in Scripture. Normally that's a bad thing. You seek after your own heart means you want something for yourself. That can't be what Yahweh is doing here. As a result, this option, while feasible, can only be speculated as to its potential meanings. The meaning of 3b is likewise problematic. What does it mean that God seeks a man like he seeks the man's heart? It almost seems tautological. God seeks a man as God seeks the man's heart? That seems quite strange. So these don't seem really to be very good options. Moving on. The second adverbial option you see on the screen is 2b, which builds on the idea that Yahweh knows the heart completely and adjudicates accordingly. It could be that he acts according to his own hearts or intentions, such as the notion in 2 Samuel 7:21. Let's take a look at that example. Because of your word and, look at this, kalibaka, according to your heart, you have acted to make your servant all great. You see the adverbial use, according to. The other option is that he acts in accordance with those following in his ways, as we see in Jeremiah 17:10. I, Yahweh, search the heart. I examine the affections to give to each kadal rakav according to his ways and according to the fruit of his works. This passage indicates that God is seeking for one entirely, or could we say wholeheartedly, devoted to him. He searches intently the heart and rewards according to the intention and the purpose. For 1 Samuel 13:14, options 3c and 3d are both possible, but express completely different meanings. 3c indicates that God seeks according to his intentions, while 3d requires that God seeks according to the intentions that the man that he seeks. So quite a bit of difference here. Alternatively to all these adverbial functions, the preposition could be precedes a indefinite noun, ish, and so therefore it can be adnominal. The adnominal usage can involve the comparison meaning of the preposition, as in 2c, or the accordance meaning, as in 2d. The first, 2c, is the traditional understanding. Yahweh has sought for himself a man who is like his heart. But whose heart is the man like? It can't be his own heart, can it? The comparison is between the heart of Yahweh and the heart of the man. So we're only left with 3e in this case. Yahweh has sought for himself a man whose heart is like Yahweh's heart. The heart, of course, represents the disposition, purpose, and intention of the person. Similar adnominal comparisons are quite common and distinguish David from other kings. For instance, his heart was not completely devoted to Yahweh, his king, or Yahweh, his God, like the heart of David, his father. You see, one heart is compared to another heart, not the same heart. This comports with recent study of Benjamin Johnson, where he concludes that while the phrase in question is potentially ambiguous, it seems most logical to be stating something about the heart of Yahweh's chosen agent. The adnominal accordance meaning also bears mentioning. This is now, so 2d describes a search for a future king who is in accordance with his intended intention or his heart. The pronoun can only refer to Yahweh here. So we are left with 3g. McCarter seems to support this interpretation option by describing Yahweh's action as the free, quote, the free divine selection of the heir to the throne. His translation, a man of his own choosing, suggests this particular option, 3g. It should be noted, though, that other clear examples of this are lacking in Scripture. It would be innovative if that was the case. So in summary, the situation is as follows. Of the 14 options, we have narrowed them down to just 4 by indicating the pronominal reference was either too vague or the interpretation didn't make sense. So we're left with these 4 options here: 3c, d, 3e, and 3g. The first 2 are adverbial functions. Notice, they're adverbial functions describing how is the man sought, what Yahweh does. The latter 2 are adnominal, meaning describing who is the man sought. 3 of the 4 use accordance meaning, that's the one in orange, according to, and 1 follows the comparative, that's the blue, like or as. In only 1 can the pronoun reference the man himself, that's 3D. The other 3 imply Yahweh. So we have arrived at somewhat of an impasse at this point. How do you, as an interpreter, decide which is the best understanding of this passage? How do you play? What do? Do you play percentages? Do you go with your favorite example? Go with what you learned in Sunday school? Or do you simply guess? Which one is it? Well, 2 issues here can help us. 1 is the question, are there other passages that may be compared to these passages? And 2, is there a different way to say something that we think is being said here that actually is more common? So are there other passages that may be compared? And is there another way to say something that actually might be more common? Let's start with the second notion first. Is there another way? The simple answer is yes for the ad nominal functions. First, understand the comparison 3E requires a bit of a strain, I think. At bottom, it implies that the man is like Yahweh's heart. The man is like Yahweh's heart. This stretches the normal comparative idiom. We might expect it to compare the man to someone else. Remember, one prophet is like another prophet. But the metaphor comparison, a man is like God's desires, his heart, his intentions, is far from clear. What does it mean that a man is like God's heart? Second, the notion that the man is according to Yahweh's heart, 3G, would be more commonly referred to using the phrase ish acharei lavevo, a man who acharei follows after, the more common word for after, someone's heart, using a widespread, widely known idiom that is used for both right living and right worship in the biblical text. That is halak plus acharei. That's not what's used here. This uses the preposition ka, like we've been seeing. For both of these reasons, in my mind, it gives weight to the adverbial functions. That is the first 2 options here. Yahweh saw the man for himself according to Yahweh's heart or according to the man's heart. A similar usage then in Jeremiah 3:15 also helps cut this exegetical Gordian knot. Let's take a look at that passage together. Jeremiah says, or God says, through the words of Jeremiah, I give shepherds to you, ka livi, according to my heart, my desire, my intentions, and they will shepherd you with knowledge and wisdom. There's little room here, I think, for the elliptical ad nominal comparisons. Yahweh is describing how he will choose the shepherds. Additionally, notice that the pronominal reference is clearly first person. Yahweh, my heart. It's first person. The manner is in agreement with my heart, Yahweh's heart, his purposes. The shepherds are given according to his intentions, his desires, and his heart. In this way, this passage is very similar to the ad nominal accordance use that we saw in 3C. 3C. Yahweh has saw the man for himself according to Yahweh's own heart. I think that is the best interpretation of the passage. Now, having said all this, the outcome of Yahweh's choice should not be overlooked in Jeremiah 3:15, as some of the astute people I'm sure have seen. Right? Notice the second phrase in that. I will give them according to my heart, and they will do what? Shepherd you with knowledge and wisdom. You see, the chosen leaders act with knowledge and wisdom because Yahweh shows the hearts of all people. He knows the hearts of all people. He elects leaders that act in accordance with his ways and his purposes, as we know in Romans 13. The same appraisal is expressed overtly in reference to God's raising up of his faithful priest in 1 Samuel 2:35. He says, I will raise up for myself a faithful priest, and he will do according to whatever is in my heart, lavavi, and my mind. This outlook is no less true with David. Yahweh chose him to administer his will to his people. Consequently, David is given a positive assessment at the culmination of his reign, since he did righteousness and justice for his people. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Hardy. We have about 7 or 8 minutes for some Q&A. So if you have a question, if you joined us late, down in the bottom of your screen, you should find a little note that says Q&A. Please insert your question there with your name and possibly where you're from, just so that we can respond to those questions. Dr. Hardy can respond to those questions. And we'll ask you to raise your hand in the question and answer. And then when you do that, we'll be able to unmute you for a question. But since there are no questions, I'm going to throw one at you, Dr. Hardy. And it's not exactly grammatically related to this, but it's related to the different versions of this particular verse. So the Peshitta and the Septuagint both seem to just translate it pretty woodenly here, but the Targum itself translates that whole section as the one who does the will of God, or His will. My question would be, how do ancient versions help us? And also when we look at grammatical constructions like this, can they help us, and how do they help us?
Right. So we actually have to ask, as you well know, two different questions when we come to the ancient versions. We have to ask, what is the ancient version using as its base text? So what text is it reading? So that's a question of text criticism. Is this text the same as the text I'm reading? So that's the first question we always need to ask when we look at ancient versions, or when we look at a quote from the Old Testament text into a New Testament text, let's say. The second question then is a hermeneutical question, well then how are they reading that particular text? So we ask the text critical question, which may be a more scholarly question, which text are they reading? And then the question is how are they reading that text? And that question of how actually gives us a lot of insight into the mindset of ancient readers. Now, oftentimes those ancient readers are much older than we are. So if it's a Targum text from over 1,000 years ago, those are ancient readers, but they're not from the same time as the text of Samuel Kings, which could be as old as going back before the exile even. That would be 2,500 years ago. So we can see that even as time goes, like interpretations can change through time of how people are reading these different passages. We can even ask the question of how this phrase, a man after God's own heart, is used in a New Testament passage, like something like Acts 13:22. Why did God raise up David? Well, the reason is, of course, that because of God's own choosing, as I've suggested, but also that then comports well with, well, if God chooses him, then does he do God's will? And so it becomes a little bit messy as, okay, which side of this interpretive issue are we landing on? Which question are we asking? All right, but that's a secondary question that we ask as we go to these texts. So the first question is, what does the original text say? And then the second question is, how then do later readers read and understand that text? Does it change? Does it move in a slightly different direction, or does it pick out interesting little parts that maybe you don't see otherwise, right? So does something like the plural uses of God's name in Genesis 1, let us make man in our image, is that reference to the Trinity? Well, I don't think that anyone would say that the original writer of the book of Genesis had that particularly in mind. That wasn't really a concept in mind. But as later readers in the Christian tradition do, they sort of pick up on that and say, oh, hey, we see this plural notion go with divinity throughout the Old Testament, and maybe this is a different way, or maybe we're uncovering something that we might have missed before, or reading this in a slightly different way. And I think that we see that from these different text traditions, and even the reuse of text or the translation of text, right? Because we can even ask this question for English translations, right? A man after God's own heart might have spun off a million different songs and lyrics and plays. And I can remember learning it as a kid in Sunday school and Lifeway material. And, okay, so be a man who follows after God's own heart. Well, that was the implication. But which one is first? Is it first that David was a man following God, or was it that God was looking for a man who would follow him? Well, I think that in our notion of God's sovereignty, regardless of where you stand on those particular theological issues, we see that that the second follows, that God's choice precedes that of the human's activity, right? God is choosing David from a very, very early point in the book. And that is in contrast in the book of Samuel, again, if we want to read the story now as a whole, with what's going on with Saul. Because Saul is being chosen after the fact, a man of no character, and he's been chosen not by Yahweh, not by God, but by the people. And that's the real contrast that's going on with this verse. Not Saul, but rather David. Why? People chose Saul, God chose David. And that seems to be the biggest issue here.